I signed my parents' house away while they smiled at me across the courtroom. The pen felt heavier than it should have. My lawyer's hand twitched beside me as if he might grab my wrist and stop me. Across the aisle, my mother sat upright, lips pressed together in something close to satisfaction. My father didn't look at me at all. He stared straight ahead, jaw set, as if this moment had been owed to him for years. The judge asked if I understood what I was doing. Yes, I said. That was the moment everyone thought the story ended. They didn't know it was only beginning. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between a grocery flyer and a church newsletter. I remember that because Tuesdays were the days I volunteered at the local library shelving returns and chatting with retirees who still loved the smell of old books. I opened the envelope at my kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me. The words didn't make sense at first. Legal language has a way of sounding distant, almost polite, even when it's cutting you open. Then I read it again and again. My parents were suing me. They wanted the house, the land behind it, the acreage my grandfather had cleared with his own hands after returning from the war. They claimed the transfer to my name had been a misunderstanding. They said I had taken advantage of them. I sat there a long time staring at the page, listening to the refrigerator hum. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was stunned in a quiet, hollow way, like the air had been pulled out of the room. That house wasn't just property. It was where I learned to ride a bike, where my mother taught me to bake bread, where my father built a porch swing from scrap wood and hung it himself. It was also where I came back years later when they started to struggle. When my mother's arthritis got worse, when my father stopped driving at night, when bills piled up and repairs went undone, I moved closer, I paid the taxes, I handled the paperwork. Eventually, on their insistence, we put the house in my name, so things are simpler, my father said, so nobody can take it from us. Now they were trying to take it from me. I called the number on the letter. That was how I met my lawyer. His office smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old carpet. He was younger than me by a few years, earnest, sharp-eyed. He read through the documents, brow furrowing deeper with every page. "This is weak," he said finally. "You've got everything done properly. Deeds, notarization, records. They don't have much to stand on." He paused, studying my face. "But it being your parents changes things," he added. "These cases are never just legal." He was right. I could already feel that. The first hearing was procedural. No testimony, just dates and motions. My parents didn't look at me then either. That hurt more than the lawsuit itself. It was as if I had already been erased. At night, I lay awake thinking about how we got here. I replayed conversations from years ago, searching for the moment everything went wrong. I remembered my mother squeezing my hand when we signed the papers. "You're a good daughter," she said. "We trust you." Trust, it turns out, is fragile when pride gets involved. As the case moved forward, my lawyer grew more insistent. He called me at home, sometimes late pacing his office as he talked. "You have to fight," he said. "If you give in now, you lose everything, not just the house. The truth." I listened. I understood, and still something inside me resisted. I wasn't afraid of losing the house. I was afraid of what winning would cost. Depositions were worse than court. Sitting across from my parents in a small room answering questions under oath felt like a family dinner turned inside out. Every memory was contested, every kindness reframed as manipulation. When my father described me as controlling, I felt something finally crack. After that, I stopped trying to defend myself in my own mind. Instead, I started looking at the situation differently. I reviewed every document, every clause, every obligation tied to that property, years of responsibility I'd quietly carried alone, taxes, maintenance, agreements grandfather had put in place to protect the land from being subdivided or sold off cheaply. Details no one else had bothered to learn. The night before the final hearing, my lawyer sat across from me, exhausted. "I'm begging you," he said. "Let me do my job. We will win." I shook my head. "Let them have it all," I said. He stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. The courtroom the next morning was smaller than people imagine. No drama, no shouting, just wood benches worn smooth by decades of quiet conflict. The judge was patient, methodical. My parents' attorney spoke confidently. My lawyer spoke carefully, almost reluctantly. When the papers were placed in front of me, my hand didn't shake. I signed. And across the room, my parents smiled. The house didn't just appear in my name by accident. That was the part no one wanted to talk about, especially not my parents. To them, the story began the day they decided they wanted it back. To me, it began years earlier, long before lawyers and courtrooms entered our lives. After I signed the papers that day, memories came flooding in, not the angry kind, the ordinary ones, the kind you don't think about until someone tells you they never mattered. When my husband passed away, I moved back to my hometown, not into my parents' house at first, but close enough to check on them regularly. My mother's hands had started to betray her. My father, proud as ever, hid his forgetfulness behind jokes and irritation. Small things slipped, then bigger ones. A missed tax payment, a leaking roof left unrepaired, medical bills shoved into drawers. I helped because that's what daughters do, especially daughters raised to believe family comes before pride. I didn't announce it, I didn't keep score, I simply stepped in. At first, it was just rides to appointments and help with paperwork. Then it became money, not loans exactly, more like quiet coverage. I paid property taxes one year when my father insisted he'd get to it. I paid them again the next year when he didn't. When the furnace broke in January, I paid for the replacement. When my mother's medications changed and insurance lagged, I covered that too. Each time I told myself it was temporary. Eventually, my father suggested we simplify things. His words. He said it made sense for the house to be in my name since I was the one handling everything. He worried about liens, about someone taking advantage of them, about what would happen if one of them ended up in long-term care. My mother agreed. She even seemed relieved. We went to a local attorney. Nothing fancy. A small office above a hardware store. Everything was explained carefully. Deeds, transfers, responsibilities. My parents asked questions. They signed willingly. The attorney asked them twice if they were sure. They were. After that, nothing changed in how we lived. They stayed in the house. I never charged them rent. I never threatened them with ownership. I kept paying what needed to be paid. When neighbors asked, I said it was still their place, because in every way that mattered emotionally it was. That's what made the lawsuit feel so unreal. In their filings, my parents claimed they didn't understand what they signed, that they thought it was temporary, that I had pressured them. Reading those words felt like watching someone rewrite your life in ink you couldn't erase. My lawyer went through each claim patiently. They don't have evidence, he said. You do. This is clean. He wanted to push hard, to depose neighbors, to subpoena bank records, to paint a picture of neglect on their part and responsibility on mine. I asked him not to. Why, he said, genuinely confused. They're accusing you of wrongdoing. I know, I said, but I don't want to destroy them. That was the moment he realized this wasn't a normal case. As the months dragged on, I noticed something else. My parents weren't prepared for ownership the way they thought. During mediation, when obligations were mentioned, taxes, insurance, upkeep, they looked surprised. My father waved it off. We'll manage, he said, though he hadn't managed in years. They were focused on winning, not on what came after. Friends tried to reassure me. They'll come to their senses, one said. This is just about control. Another suggested I countersue, make them feel it, she said. But I didn't want revenge, not in the way people usually mean it. I wanted the truth to stand on its own without me shouting it. There's a kind of exhaustion that comes from being misunderstood by the people who raised you. It seeps into your bones. I felt it every time I walked past the old oak tree on the edge of the property, the one my grandfather planted. He used to say, "Land remembers who takes care of it." That stuck with me. During one late-night review of the documents, I noticed something my parents had clearly overlooked. A series of agreements attached to the land, old ones tied to conservation efforts and long-term maintenance. They weren't burdens exactly, but they were responsibilities, legal, ongoing, unavoidable. I realized then that this wasn't about tricking anyone, it was about allowing reality to surface. My lawyer noticed my change in focus. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that ownership isn't just a prize, it's a job." He nodded, uncertain. The closer we got to trial, the more determined he became. He practiced arguments, prepared exhibits. He wanted to protect me. And yet the clearer my own decision became. I wasn't giving up, I was stepping back. The final hearing loomed. My parents grew confident. They spoke to me once in the hallway through their attorney. My mother's voice was cool. "This didn't have to be ugly," she said. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to explain. The night before court, I sat alone in my living room, documents spread across the table. I thought about everything that house had cost me and everything it had given me. I felt sad, but I also felt steady. When morning came, I was ready. By the time Part 3 began, the case no longer felt like something happening to me. It felt like something I was walking toward step by step with my eyes open. The legal rhythm settled in, motions filed, responses returned, dates set and reset. My lawyer kept me informed, careful not to overwhelm me, but his concern showed in the way he spoke. He was doing his job well, I could see that, and I could see how deeply he believed in the idea of winning. For him, winning meant protecting my rights, my reputation, my future. For me, winning had started to mean something else entirely. The day he finally said the words that would echo in my head for weeks, we were sitting across from each other in his office. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, striping the table between us. "You have to fight," he said, not sharply, not angrily, almost gently. "If you don't, the court will assume you agree with their version of events." I looked at the framed diplomas on his wall. His parents had probably been proud when he earned those. Mine used to be proud of me, too. "I understand," I said. He leaned forward. "No, I don't think you do. This isn't about pride. This is about precedent. If you roll over, they walk away, believing they were wronged. They'll tell that story forever." That part bothered me, not because it was untrue, but because it already was true. They had already decided who I was in their story. The next deposition confirmed it. My mother spoke calmly, almost serenely, as she described me as distant, manipulative, overly involved. My father framed his forgetfulness as trust misplaced. Listening through the transcript later, I hardly recognized the woman they were describing. At one point, my lawyer paused the recording. "You hear this?" he asked. "This is character assassination. We can counter it." I nodded, but inside something settled. I had spent my whole life trying to be understood by them, good grades, reliable choices, showing up when they needed me. None of it had protected me from this moment. Fighting harder wasn't going to fix that. What did surprise me was how tired they looked in person, not angry, not righteous, just worn, the kind of weariness that comes from holding on to something too tightly for too long. During a mediation session when the mediator suggested compromise, my parents refused outright. "We want what's ours," my father said. The word ours hung in the air. No one asked what it would cost them. After that meeting, my lawyer walked me back to my car. "They're not going to stop," he said. "They want to win. Total victory." I rested my hand on the door handle. "So do you," I said softly. He looked at me surprised, then he sighed. "I want you protected," he corrected. That night, I reviewed the property documents again, slowly, carefully, not like a defendant preparing a defense, but like a steward reviewing responsibilities. I saw patterns I hadn't noticed before, obligations that would transfer with ownership, whether my parents understood them or not, legal realities that didn't care about family dynamics. For the first time, I saw a path forward that didn't involve confrontation. The idea didn't come with relief, it came with a strange calm, the kind that arrives when you stop arguing with yourself. At our next meeting, my lawyer noticed immediately that something had shifted. "You're quiet," he said. "I've made a decision," I replied. He straightened. "Good. Let's talk strategy." "I'm not going to fight them the way you want me to." His expression tightened. "Then how?" "I'm going to let the truth do the work," I said, without me pushing it. He shook his head. "That's not how court works." "Maybe not," I said, "but it's how consequences work." We went back and forth for nearly an hour. He warned me about risks, about regret, about public record. He wasn't wrong. Everything he said made sense. And still, I didn't waver. Finally, he leaned back and rubbed his temples. "I need to be clear," he said. "If you do this, you may lose everything." "I know." "You may look foolish." "I know." "You may never repair this relationship." I paused. That part isn't in my control. That was when he stopped arguing. From that day on, our conversations changed. He didn't agree with me, but he respected the decision. He prepared documents carefully, ensuring everything was done correctly. If I was going to step aside, he wanted it done cleanly. My parents, meanwhile, grew more confident. Their posture in court shifted. Their voices strengthened. They had started to believe their own version of events completely. I watched it happen without interrupting. The closer we got to the final hearing, the more people around me tried to intervene. Friends, extended family, even a former neighbor who meant well but didn't understand. "You don't owe them this," she said. "I know," I replied. What I didn't say was that I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it so I could walk away, knowing I hadn't become someone I didn't recognize. The night before the final hearing, my lawyer called. "This is your last chance to change course," he said. "Once those papers are signed, there's no going back." I thanked him for everything he'd done. Then I told him I would see him in court. When I hung up, I slept better than I had in months. Part 3. You have to fight 1,032 words and continue. By the time Part 4 arrived, my decision no longer felt dramatic. It felt settled, like a stone placed carefully in the middle of my chest. Heavy, yes, but steady. My lawyer still tried in small ways to pull me back. Not with arguments anymore, but with questions. "Are you sure you've thought through retirement?" he asked one afternoon. "This property was part of your plan?" "I have other plans," I said. He nodded, unconvinced. We sat across from each other in silence for a moment. Outside his window, traffic moved along Main Street, ordinary and indifferent. People going to lunch, running errands, living lives untouched by the kind of family fracture that doesn't show on the surface. "I need you to understand something," he said finally. "When you give them everything, they won't thank you." "I'm not doing it for thanks." He watched me closely. "Then why?" I took a breath. "Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life explaining myself to people who've already decided who I am." That was the closest I came to saying it out loud. From that point on, the legal work became mechanical. Drafts, revisions, transfers prepared with precision. My lawyer made sure every document reflected my intent clearly and irrevocably. If I was stepping aside, there would be no ambiguity. Word spread as it always does in small towns. I heard through acquaintances that my parents were telling people I'd finally come to my senses, that I'd realized my mistake, that the house was going back where it belonged. I let them talk. What surprised me was how quickly they began planning. Conversations shifted from the lawsuit to what they'd do once they had things back. My mother mentioned remodeling. My father talked about leasing part of the land. They spoke as if the years of quiet maintenance had been effortless, as if responsibility appeared automatically with ownership. I listened without correcting them. In private moments, doubt did creep in. Usually late at night, I'd stand at my window and picture the porch swing my father built, the way it creaked softly in the summer. I wondered if I was betraying my grandfather's memory by letting go of land he'd protected so carefully. Then I reminded myself of something he used to say. You can't save people from lessons they insist on learning? The final hearing approached with a strange lack of tension, no last-minute settlements, no emotional appeals. My parents were certain, their lawyer was confident, my lawyer was resigned. The morning of the hearing, I arrived early. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. I sat alone on a bench, hands folded in my lap, listening to footsteps echo down the hall. When my parents arrived, my mother avoided my eyes. My father nodded once curtly, as if to acknowledge a business transaction. It struck me then how completely our relationship had shifted. We weren't family in that space. We were opposing parties. The judge reviewed the documents carefully, asked questions, confirmed understanding. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. You're aware, he said, that this transfer is final. Yes, I answered. My lawyer shifted in his seat. I felt the weight of his concern beside me. When the papers were placed in front of me, time seemed to slow. The pen rested between my fingers. I thought of every winter I'd worried about frozen pipes, every summer I'd arranged repairs, every quiet sacrifice that never made it into a courtroom record. Then I signed. One page, then another. Across the aisle, my parents' expressions softened into something like relief. My mother reached for my father's hand. He squeezed it. They smiled, not broadly, not cruelly, but with the satisfaction of people who believed they had reclaimed what was rightfully theirs. The judge finalized the order. The gavel came down with a dull final sound. For a brief moment, the room was silent. That was when I noticed the shift. It started small. A pause. My parents' lawyer flipping back through the documents slower now, his confident posture stiffened. He leaned closer to the papers, reading more carefully than he had before. The judge noticed, too. Is there an issue, counsel? He asked. The lawyer hesitated just a second too long. No, Your Honor, he said, just reviewing. But his face had changed, color draining, brows drawing together. My lawyer looked at him, curious, then at me. I didn't react. I simply sat there, hands folded, waiting, because I knew what he was finding. The attachments, the recorded obligations, the clauses tied to ownership that didn't disappear just because the deed changed hands, agreements that required maintenance payments compliance, the kind of details that never make headlines but shape lives. The hearing ended without further comment. The judge dismissed us. People began to stand. My parents were still smiling. Their lawyer was not. As we gathered our things, my lawyer leaned toward me. What did you do? He whispered. Nothing, I said quietly. I just stopped carrying it alone. We walked out of the courtroom without another word exchanged. In the hallway, I heard my parents' lawyer speaking urgently, his voice low-controlled but strained. I didn't turn around. For the first time since this began, I felt light. Not victorious, not smug. Just free. The courtroom emptied slowly after the judge adjourned, the way it always does when people are unsure whether something important has truly ended. Papers were gathered. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Conversations stayed low and cautious, as if raised voices might undo what had just been decided. My parents stood together near the aisle. My mother held her purse tightly against her side. My father spoke to their lawyer in short, clipped sentences. Whatever he was saying, it wasn't celebratory. His voice had lost the relaxed confidence I'd heard earlier. My lawyer and I remained seated a moment longer. He watched me carefully, as if waiting for a reaction he hadn't seen yet. Anger, relief, regret. I gave him none of those. You okay? He asked quietly. Yes, I said, and I meant it. He nodded, though I could tell he didn't fully understand. Lawyers are trained to read outcomes in terms of wins and losses. What had just happened didn't fit neatly into either category. We stood and walked toward the exit. As we passed my parents, my mother finally looked at me. There was uncertainty in her eyes now, a faint crease between her brows. It's done, she said not unkindly, almost like she was trying to convince herself. Yes, I replied, it is. Outside, the air felt different, cooler. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that settles in before a slow rain. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, breathing it in. My lawyer cleared his throat. You know, he said, if you change your mind, there are limited windows for appeal, not much, but... I won't, I said gently. He studied me. You planned this. I didn't answer right away. I prepared for reality, I said finally. There's a difference. He exhaled long and slow. I've been doing this a long time, he said. I've seen people give up out of fear, out of guilt, out of exhaustion, but I've never seen someone do it this deliberately. I didn't give up, I said. I handed something back. He nodded thoughtful. And what happens now? That's up to them, I said. The drive home felt longer than usual. I passed familiar roads, familiar storefronts, places where my parents and I had once stood together arguing over paint colors or laughing at nothing in particular. I wondered how long it would take before those memories stopped feeling like unfinished sentences. That evening my phone rang. It was my father. I almost didn't answer, not because I was afraid of what he'd say, but because I knew it would change something no matter what. I answered. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" I asked. There was a pause. "About the house." "I thought that was settled," I said. "So did I," he replied. His voice was tight, now strained in a way I hadn't heard before. "Our lawyer says there are conditions." "Conditions," I repeated. "Obligations," he corrected, "things we weren't told about." I closed my eyes. "You were told," I said calmly. "They were in the documents, the same ones you signed years ago." "That was different," he snapped. Then he caught himself. "We didn't think." "I know," I said. Silence stretched between us. My mother came on the line next. Her tone was softer. "We didn't realize how much you've been handling," she said. "The taxes, the maintenance, the agreements." I didn't respond immediately, not out of spite, out of care. This was a moment that didn't need rushing. "I never hid any of it," I said finally. "I just didn't announce it." "Well, she said it's a lot." "Yes," I agreed. After we hung up, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the same place I'd opened that first letter months earlier. The room felt quieter now, but not emptier. There's a difference between silence and absence. Over the next few days, things unfolded quickly. My parents' lawyer called mine. There were questions, clarifications, a request for copies of old records. The tone was markedly different. No accusations, no confidence, just concern. My lawyer called me after the first of those conversations. "You didn't mislead them," he said. "I know. They're overwhelmed." "I know." He hesitated. "They might ask you for help." "I expected that." "What will you do?" I looked out the window at the yard I now knew I would never own again. "I'll answer questions," I said. "I won't take it back." That was the boundary I decided on. Not punishment, not rescue, just clarity. A week later, I met my parents at the house. For the first time since the lawsuit began, we stood together without attorneys present. The house looked the same, weathered, solid, holding more history than any of us could summarize. My father walked slowly through the rooms, touching walls, opening cabinets. My mother sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bills spread out in front of her. "I didn't know it added up like this," she said quietly. "It always did," I replied. She looked up at me. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I did," I said, "just not loudly." She nodded, absorbing that. We talked for hours, not about blame, about logistics, about next steps, about what it really meant to own something. As I left that day, my father stood on the porch. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," I answered, "but I chose to." He didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. That was enough for now. The truth didn't arrive with a shout. It came quietly, the way real consequences usually do, through phone calls, letters, and long pauses where confidence used to live. After that first meeting at the house, my parents' lawyer requested another conversation. This time he asked to speak with me directly. My lawyer was present, of course, but he said very little. He didn't need to. The opposing attorney sat across from us in a small conference room. He looked tired, not defeated, just older than he had a week earlier. "I want to be clear," he began, folding his hands. "No one misrepresented anything here. The documents were valid, properly executed. My client simply didn't fully grasp the scope." "That's not unusual," my lawyer said carefully. The attorney nodded. "What is unusual is how extensive the obligations are." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of agreements I knew well, conservation easements, long-term maintenance requirements, tax structures grandfather had put in place to keep the land intact and protected. None of it was hidden. It was just ignored. "These don't dissolve with ownership," the attorney said. "They follow the property." "Yes," I said. "They always have." He looked at me, then really looked. "You managed all of this." "For years. And you never mentioned it during litigation." "I was never asked," I replied, and I never denied it. He sat back, running a hand through his hair. "My clients are overwhelmed." I didn't take pleasure in that. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was something closer to inevitability. This was what happened when people fought for control without understanding responsibility. A few days later, my parents' calls became more frequent, less accusatory, more tentative. My mother asked questions she'd never asked before. How much were the annual taxes, really? What did the easement require? Who inspected compliance? I answered honestly, without judgment, without rescue. My father struggled more. He hated admitting he was in over his head. He hated that the house he thought he'd reclaimed now felt heavier than before. During one call, his frustration boiled over. "You set us up," he said. I let the silence stretch. "No," I said finally. "I carried it for you. You asked for it back. Now you have it." That was the moment his anger collapsed into something quieter, fear maybe, or realization. The lawyer's face turning pale in the courtroom replayed in my mind more than once. It wasn't the look of someone outsmarted. It was the look of someone finally seeing the full picture too late. That expression had traveled quickly from him to my parents, then outward into their world. Neighbors started asking questions, not unkindly, but with curiosity. "Didn't you used to handle all that?" someone asked my mother at the grocery store. She nodded, embarrassed. Reality has a way of spreading. A month passed, then another. My parents struggled, but they didn't collapse. They were forced to learn, to ask for professional help, to budget differently, to confront the truth that ownership meant effort, not entitlement. One afternoon, my mother called and asked if I could come by. "Just to talk," she said. We sat at the same kitchen table where she once signed the deed years earlier. Papers were spread out again, but this time she was the one holding the pen. "I didn't understand how much you did," she said quietly. I thought you just wanted control." I looked at her across the table. She looked smaller than I remembered. "I wanted stability," I said, "for all of us." She nodded, tears gathering but not falling. "I see that now." My father joined us later. He didn't apologize. Not directly. Instead, he said something else. "I didn't want to feel old," he admitted. "I didn't want to need help." I understood that. Aging has a way of turning pride into armor. Heavy armor. "I never wanted to take anything from you," I said. "I just didn't want to watch everything fall apart." He stared at the floor for a long moment. Then he looked up at me. "You won," he said. I shook my head. "No," I replied. I stopped pretending. That seemed to land differently. The lawyer who had once spoken so confidently now spoke with caution. He advised my parents carefully. He respected the documents he had once skimmed. He never accused me again. As for my own lawyer, he called one evening and laughed softly. "You know," he said, "I thought I'd seen every strategy in the book." "This wasn't a strategy," I said. "No," he agreed. "It was restraint." That word stayed with me. Restraint isn't weakness. It's strength, used deliberately. The story didn't end with humiliation. It ended with understanding, slow, imperfect, but real. My parents didn't suddenly become grateful. I didn't suddenly feel whole, but something shifted. They stopped trying to erase me, and I stopped carrying what wasn't mine to carry anymore. The months that followed were quieter than anything that came before. No court dates, no motions, no legal language slicing through ordinary life. Just time, slow, steady, and honest. That surprised me more than the lawsuit ever did. My parents didn't suddenly become different people. There was no dramatic apology, no emotional collapse at my doorstep. What happened instead was smaller and in many ways harder. They adjusted, they learned, and little by little they began to see me again, not as an adversary, not as a problem to solve, but as their daughter. We started with phone calls about practical things. My mother asked how often the county reassessed the land. My father wanted to understand the inspection schedule tied to the conservation agreement. I answered what I could. When I didn't know, I told them where to look. I didn't take control back. That was important. Once my father said almost offhandedly, "You made this look easy." I didn't respond right away. Then I said it wasn't easy, I just didn't complain. That landed. The house remained theirs. I never tried to reclaim it. That mattered to them more than they admitted. It showed I wasn't playing a long game, wasn't waiting for them to fail. I had meant what I said in court. I had let it go. What I didn't let go of was my sense of self. As time passed, something else softened too, my own resentment. I hadn't realized how much of it I was still carrying until it started to loosen its grip. Not because they earned forgiveness, but because I no longer needed it to protect myself. We began meeting occasionally for lunch, neutral places at first, a diner halfway between our homes. Then eventually the old kitchen table again, the same one that had seen signatures and silence and fear. One afternoon my mother pushed a folder toward me. "I kept everything this time," she said. "Organized." I smiled. "I can see that." She hesitated. "I didn't know how much work it was." "I know," I said gently. That was the closest we came to an apology, and it was enough. My father changed more slowly. Pride doesn't fade overnight, especially for men who were raised to believe independence was everything. But he started asking questions without defensiveness. He listened. That more than words told me things had shifted. One evening as we sat on the porch, he said, "Your grandfather would have respected what you did." I swallowed. That meant more than he knew. Looking back, I understand now why my lawyer struggled with my choices. The law is built on clarity, winners and losers, right and wrong. Family is messier. It lives in the gray spaces between intention and impact. What I learned through all of this is something I wish I'd understood sooner. Boundaries aren't punishments. They're invitations to healthier relationships. When you stop rescuing people from the consequences of their choices, you give them a chance to grow, and you give yourself permission to rest. For those listening who are carrying more than their share financially, emotionally, quietly, this is what I want you to hear. Your worth isn't measured by how much you sacrifice in silence. Love doesn't require self-erasure, and doing the right thing doesn't always look like winning in court. Sometimes it looks like stepping aside and letting the truth stand on its own. My parents and I aren't perfect now. We probably never will be. But we speak honestly, we see each other clearly, and we've found a way forward that doesn't require anyone to disappear. That to me is reconciliation, not forgetting the past, but learning from it without letting it define you. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to pause for a moment. Think about the roles you've been carrying in your own family. Ask yourself which ones are truly yours and which ones you've taken on out of habit or fear. If you believe stories like this matter, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you'd like to hear more reflections grounded in real-life family and quiet strength, you're welcome to subscribe and stay a while. Thank you for listening.